UFC Fight Night, Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy. It's going to be the entirety of the card, full fight predictions. First time I'm doing a YouTube video, so cut me a little bit of slack. I'm used to being able to pause it a little bit on TikTok, but we're going to go from the bottom of the card all the way to the top and talk about each fight relatively quickly, keep it within 10 to 15 minutes so I can do a YouTube video every single day so they're not too long-winded for you guys, not a 40-minute, 50-minute, 2-hour predictions video. No, we're going to do 10 to 15 minutes, breakdown basically what you need to know about each fight, starting off with Vanessa Demopoulos versus Talita Alenkar. Mondays are going to be my full fight card prediction videos. Every other video will be as determined, you know what I mean? Vanessa Demopoulos versus Talita Alenkar. Alenkar is going to try to grapple here. She's not too high output on the feet. Demopoulos has much higher output overall on the feet. In my opinion, hits a little bit harder on the feet on top of that. I think they both pretty much suck regardless. Both low level. I think Vanessa Demopoulos, again, just higher output, almost like double the output of Alenkar on the feet. And on the mat, when Alenkar is going to be on top inevitably in this fight, Demopoulos is very, very active in her guard, and that's just going to be one thing where in fights where you don't have some massive finishing ability on either end, you don't have some massive hitting ability on either end as well, like it's going to be all up to output, and it's going to be all up to how it looks on the mat, and Vanessa Demopoulos is just going to be doing more both on the mat and on the feet in this fight, in my opinion. Although she does get hit relatively often, Alenkar just doesn't put out the output and the volume that you would want. It's going to come down, again, straight up to output. Demopoulos has a much higher output in every facet of MMA. Give me Demopoulos in this fight. Moving forward, Victor Henry versus Pedro Falcao. I don't understand how this fight's being made, because Pedro Falcao just lost to Victor Hugo in his UFC debut, and Victor Henry's 2-1 in his last 3, and lost to Charles Jourdain of all people, and who's a fringe top 15 guy, by the way, so it doesn't necessarily make any sense how Pedro Falcao is going to be fighting Victor Henry. I mean, it's such a massive step down in competition for Henry and a massive step in competition for Falcao. Falcao doesn't have some ridiculous finishing upside to where he can crack Henry's chin, which, I mean, he is a very, very durable fighter overall. Henry's much better cardio, much better pace overall, going to be able to, in my opinion, have much higher volume in the striking, very good overall in the grappling. He's going to force a pace on Falcao, and he's going to be getting the fight he wants. Style fight that Victor Henry wants is going to be given. He's going to get what he wants in this fight, and he's going to win it. It's as simple as that. I don't really think Falcao has much for Henry in this, regardless of Henry's age. Loma Lookboonmee versus Estela Nunes. I do not see how there's a single chance Estela Nunes wins this fight. Both of these girls are relatively inactive, but the one that wins when they're inactive regardless is Loma Lookboonmee. It's coming off a really good win streak. Beat Denise Gomez back in 2022 as her best win. Estela Nunes, I think 4 or 5 losses in a row or something in that realm. Lost to Victoria Dudakova, breaking her arm in the middle of that fight, or right in the beginning of that fight, actually. Hasn't fought since. Was supposed to fight Molly McCann, ended up pulling out, I guess. I don't know if something happened with her, or now she just wanted to fight Loma, because Ariane Cornelossi was supposed to fight Loma Lookboonmee. I don't know what happened. Loma has recovered in the striking and the grappling. I think Loma's a much harder hitter overall. Much better cardio, much more durable. Nunes doesn't really offer too much apart from like some round 1 explosion, which she doesn't hit hard enough to just completely one-punch knock out Loma. Loma's just much better overall, top to bottom. Still young. I think she's like 29 years old. So give me Loma Lookboonmee in this one. I think all 3 of these go by decision. However, I would not be surprised. Maybe Henry gets a submission. I'm not too keen on it, but Loma, maybe she could hurt Nunes, gas her out as the fight goes, and then end up getting a submission, club and sub or something similar to that. Maybe Nunes starts folding, Loma takes the back. Loma has been using her grappling a little bit more often than not. Daniel Frunze versus Reese McKee. McKee gets hit way too often. It's as simple as that. Frunze doesn't necessarily gas out. He's not great, but he's just going to keep moving forward. He's going to keep hitting McKee in this fight. Now, McKee is ridiculously durable, but it just means he's going to keep taking damage throughout the entirety of the fight. I don't think Frunze is just going to knock him out cold. I just think he's going to be hitting him a lot more often, presenting a lot more damage. And if Reese McKee's really winning minutes here, maybe he lands a couple shots. And for the most part, maybe I think he's going to be holding up Frunze against the cage. That's one thing where we can end up seeing Frunze gets held up against the cage a decent amount in his fights. But I think Reese McKee is just going to be getting hit a little bit often in this fight to where he ends up losing this to Frunze. Now, the Chitty split decision isn't a bad look. Reese McKee's split decision against Chitty and Jokawani, because Chitty's actually looking a lot better at 170, but at the end of the day, you get hit way too often, especially against guys who are relatively hard hitters like Frunze is. It's not the best of looks for McKee to try to win a round, so that's where I end up thinking he loses this one. Now, by decision, more than likely, just because he is really, really durable. Now, this is a wash. Diana Barbosa versus Diana Belbita. Belbita shouldn't be in the UFC. It's as simple as that. Just got submitted by Molly McCann, I think was her last fight. I don't know if she fought since then. I'm going to actually double check that real quick, but I don't really see what Belbita has to offer her. I mean, she's much weaker overall. She has the ridiculously higher output on the feet, but no power whatsoever behind it. And Barbosa's the levels above grappler, much more physical woman between the two. And Barbosa's going to be able to get this fight down and sub her in the first round. That's as simple as that, honestly. I don't think there's going to be any ifs, ands, or buts about it. Also, Barbosa's fought at flyweight relatively more often. I think Belbita's coming up to flyweight, which is really weird. I don't know if she fought Molly McCann at flyweight or at strawweight. She's usually a strawweight at times, I believe. Fighting Karolina Kowalkiewicz, I believe, at strawweight, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, I just think she's completely outsized, going to be completely out-grappled here, and Barbosa's going to sub her in the first round. Davey Grant versus Daniel Santos. I think Daniel Santos is going to be putting on a very good pace on Grant. Grant really does usually put a good pace up, but his age has been showing a little bit more often in his fights. You could tell it's a very exponential decline in guys who have very awkward styles, and Davey Grant does have a very awkward style that he ends up fighting with. And you could see in that Rafael Assunção fight, even though he did win it by finish at the end, very, very controversial at that, he does still put up a good amount of output, but Santos can add to that output. Santos put out a good output himself. Santos also is going to be moving forward. I think he's a very good grappler on top of that as well. And Davey Grant, just in his recent fights, hasn't looked as good. The Tavares fight just made him look a little bit slower, even though he won it. The Daniel Marcos fight, I actually thought he won the Daniel Marcos fight, which is pretty funny. So he could be coming off of a 4-fight win streak, and I'm still talking about him like this. I think he's looking slower each fight. I do think he's looking a little bit worse for wear. I don't think he takes damage as well in these fights either. I think his output is starting to dwindle as well, and I think Daniel Santos is a guy who's going to be putting the pressure on him. Really good Muay Thai stance as well, and he's a very good grappler on top of it. So I think if he wants to implement the grappling, he can on Davey Grant. It's a step up in competition for Santos for sure, going from Johnny Munoz about almost 2 years ago, actually, up to a relatively active Davey Grant. Yeah, it's a little bit of an interesting one for sure. But at the end of the day, I do think age is going to play a massive part here, and Santos is going to be able to win this more than likely by decision. Luis Garule versus Ode Osborne. Don't want to talk about it too much. Ode hasn't been looking the greatest in his fights recently. Garule can extend this fight. I don't think Ode is going to be finishing this fight relatively soon. I think Garule can make this fight last a little longer, and just outpoints Ode across this time. I think the striking favors Garule by a pretty significant margin here. Ends up throwing a lot more output, in my opinion, like a lot more output, and that's the thing where it's going to separate him and Ode. Maybe he could hurt Ode. Ode does kind of get cracked a little bit. It's been a while since he's been just knocked out flush. He has lost a lot recently by submission against Asal Mabayev and Jafo Filho. The Ronaldo Rodriguez loss was a pretty bad look after what we saw Borjas do to him, but at the end of the day, he cracked Ronaldo and then just ended up trying to jump into that triangle, get reversed, and just look bad from there on out. I think Garule is going to be fine on the feet here. It'll be a decent fight on the feet between the two, but it's going to be mainly Garule more than anything here as the fight extends. Torres Finney versus Robert Valentin. This is one of the funniest fights of the year. It's going to be a straight grappling fight. I don't really have some ridiculous breakdown on it. I think Finney's just going to be the much more physical guy, much more imposing guy between the two. Robert Valentin's performance against Ryan Lauder was legitimately hilarious. I know Finney fought a ridiculous amount of times on the Contender Series, but at the end of the day, he's still a physical specimen. It's going to be hilarious when he just completely slams Valentin on his back. And Valentin's going to want that because he's going to want to grapple, but it's going to be hard to get a choke on a guy like Torres Finney. It's just how long can Finney's gas tank last? He's also fighting again in the Apex, which is funny. Like his last 4 fights would be in the Apex. I think he fought 3 times in the Contender Series, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, I don't really see how Valentin really wins this fight unless Finney just completely gasses. And I think Finney's gonna be fine with the takedowns here. Much higher output, by the way. I mean, the striking is night and day. Even though Torres isn't like some great striker, like Valentin doesn't really throw on the feet whatsoever. He wants a grappling fight, and he's more than likely gonna get it. All right, Brad Tavares versus Gerald Meerschaert. If Gerald Meerschaert can't grapple, he's probably going to lose the fight. Brad Tavares is the best anti-grappler in the UFC. I don't really have much deeper of a breakdown for you there. Tavares hasn't looked that great, of course. He's been a little bit lower in output, a little bit worse for wear in terms of his durability. So he's usually the guy that's super durable. It's a fantastic anti-grappler. The one way I could see Meerschaert winning this fight is maybe he does hurt Tavares with the right hand down, even though Meerschaert's striking isn't that great. And then maybe he just gets a lot of control time against the cage. That's one thing where Tavares is defending takedowns for such a long amount of time and he just loses minutes. But I'd just be really surprised at that. I think Tavares has this pretty much covered. Kennedy, but it's going to be a boring one. Don't think Tavares is going to like completely blow by him. No, it's going to be a very, very boring fight. Kennedy and Nzechukwu versus Martin Buday. If Nzechukwu can't get past Buday, how bad does he look? I mean, heavyweight is desperate of more and more talent as it goes forward. I don't think Kennedy is really that great, but he is improving overall. It looks decent at heavyweight, I guess. I mean, he fought the two of the worst heavyweights in the UFC, in Chris Barnett and Lucas Brzezinski. And Zetriku should be just moving forward and knocking Budai out here. With all due respect, like, Budai got walked down and beaten the life out of by Shamil Gaziev, of all people. So yeah, and Zetriku should win this, but I mean, we saw his fight against Ovince St. Preux. You can't really trust him to put up to put up a performance that is worth noting when it comes to a relatively competitive fight. I mean, again, that Ovince St. Preux fight, even though at 205 just keeps replaying in my head, he should be faster here, should have the more power. His output at times can just be very, very concerning, and that's where, like, I get a little worried about wanting to back him in certain fights. Like, I could very well see Budai just throwing out relatively similar output in this. But then again, like, Kennedy genuinely should win this fight. I'd be surprised if he doesn't. I'm going to go Kennedy, but it is what it is. Chongo Lee versus Cortavius Romeus. Now, listen. Cortavius Romeus got given the most favorable matchup he could have possibly been given in the UFC in Gaston Bolaños in his debut fight. And Gaston Bolaños is a guy who cannot grapple whatsoever, at all. Cortavius Romeus can only grapple. He cannot strike, and he could not grapple Gaston Bolaños. It was so bad. It was such an embarrassing performance. I don't see how he's UFC level whatsoever. I think Chongo Lee, although I don't think he's fantastic, I do think he's going to be landing a lot more overall on the feet. I think he's going to be able to be fine on the mat. I mean, the strike numbers are not even comparable between the two. I think he's going to be able to mitigate it. I mean, he's a 60% takedown defense, which is okay so far in what he's been in the UFC. It hasn't been that great of a prospect in Chongo Lee, but at the end of the day, I don't see how Cortavius Romeus is going to walk through a guy after being given maybe the most favorable matchup he could have been given entering bantamweight and completely blowing that. Like, he could not grapple Gaston Bolaños at all. So I'm going to show a little bit of confidence in Chongo Lee to be able to maintain distance, to avoid the takedowns, and be able to piece him up on the feet. Moving forward, Joanderson Brito versus Pat Sabatini. A lot of people are going to be on Joanderson Brito here. I think he's a physically imposing freak of nature. I do think this guy is absolutely hilarious to watch, but he does not put up punches and bunches. He's not an elite combination guy. He's not some fantastic pace guy. He does put a good amount of pressure on you and throws hard. But Pat Sabatini is an otherworldly grappler. I do think Pat Sabatini is going to be able to take him down. I think he's going to be able to get his back. I think he's going to be able to choke out Joanderson Brito and get that submission, especially in the first round, as long as he can mitigate the damage. And that's the one thing I'm concerned about. His chin isn't the greatest overall, but I'm surprised he's this big of an underdog, genuinely. And here's the thing. I talked about Sean Brady being this guy who on the mat is unbelievable because he passes guard, he gets into positions with submission, and he's fantastic with his top pressure. You don't see grapplers nowadays be that good on top when they get a guy down. Pat Sabatini is similar to Sean Brady in that regard. Sabatini's going to do that to Joanderson Brito. I want you to remember that. I know I'm really hoping he doesn't just get knocked out cold and I look like an idiot, but yeah. Sabatini by submission, round 1. And to finish it off, Roll Murphy versus Josh Emmett. It's a very simple breakdown, although it's the main event and we want to go break down this prospect on the Roll Murphy. He's just going to be able to outpoint Josh Emmett throughout the entire fight. Get the style fight he wants. He's going to be moving forward. He's going to be piecing him up. He's going to have the higher output. He's a better grappler between the two on top of that. Josh Emmett has a right hand and he's going to be moving backwards basically the entirety of the fight. Do you really want to back a guy who's going to have a right hand? And that's about it. And he doesn't really get too many I mean, he has, apart from the Bryce Mitchell one, his last knockout was in 2019. He's not going to knock out Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy's going to be moving forward. He's going to be piecing him up. He's going to be putting out the higher output. Give me Lerone Murphy here by decision across the 5 rounds. He's not some, like, relentless finisher, some imposing finisher on top of that. But yeah, that's the full fight card breakdown. They're going to be 10 to 15 minutes for the most part every single week. Every single Monday on top of that. And if you guys want to follow me on TikTok, go ahead at MMA_DBM on TikTok. Yeah, any YouTube suggestions, go ahead and comment underneath. See you guys.